Sarah Martinez stood at the gates of Fort Benning on a humid Georgia morning, her duffel bag weighing heavy on her shoulder and her heart pounding against her ribs. At 22, she was older than most of the fresh-faced recruits streaming through the entrance, but that wasn't what made her different. It was the quiet determination in her dark eyes and the way she carried herself, not with arrogance, but with the careful posture of someone who had learned early that the world was watching, waiting for her to fail. She had grown up in East Los Angeles, where military service was often seen as either a last resort or an escape route. Sarah saw it as something else entirely, an opportunity to prove that a girl from the barrio could stand shoulder to shoulder with anyone. Her mother, Elena, had cleaned office buildings for 12 hours a day to support Sarah and her two younger brothers. Her father had left when Sarah was 14, taking with him any illusion that life would be easy or fair. The decision to enlist hadn't been impulsive. Sarah had spent 2 years working double shifts at a local diner, saving every penny she could while watching her high school friends either settle into dead-end jobs or fall into the trap of easy money that came with dangerous associations. She wanted something different. She wanted to matter. Basic training at Fort Benning was designed to break people down and build them back up, but Sarah quickly discovered that some people seemed predetermined for breaking. From the first day, when she struggled to keep pace during the initial fitness test, the whispers began. "City girl can't hang," she heard someone mutter as she gasped for air after the 2-mile run. Probably thought this was going to be like the movies. The comment stung, but not as much as the truth behind them. Sarah was not naturally athletic. While other recruits seemed to effortlessly scale walls and complete obstacle courses, she fought for every inch of progress. Her pull-ups were shaky, her push-ups often incomplete, and her running times consistently placed her in the bottom third of her training company. Drill Sergeant Morrison took particular notice of Sarah's struggles, but not in the way she had hoped. Morrison was a 15-year Army veteran who had earned his stripes in Afghanistan and Iraq. He was known for his ability to spot potential in the most unlikely candidates, but he was also notorious for his brutal honesty with those he deemed unfit for military service. "Martinez!" Morrison's voice would boom across the training ground whenever Sarah fell behind during morning PT. "You planning on asking the enemy to wait while you catch your breath?" The other recruits would snicker, and Sarah would feel her cheeks burn with embarrassment as she pushed herself harder, only to fall further behind. The worst part wasn't the physical challenges. It was the way her fellow recruits began to distance themselves from her. In military training, weakness in one person could affect the entire unit, and no one wanted to be associated with the person who might cause everyone to fail. Sarah found herself eating alone, sleeping in a bunk surrounded by whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, and partnering with whoever was left over during training exercises. Among her training company was Jake Thompson, a former high school football star from Alabama who seemed to excel at everything military life threw at him. Jake had the kind of natural leadership that made other recruits gravitate toward him, and his easy confidence made even the drill sergeants crack the occasional smile. He wasn't cruel to Sarah, but his indifference was almost worse than outright hostility. When she struggled with her rifle assembly or fell behind during marches, he would simply look through her, as if she weren't worth the energy of acknowledgement. Then there was Lisa Chun, a former college athlete who had joined the Army to follow in her father's footsteps. Lisa was everything Sarah wasn't: fast, strong, confident, and seemingly born for military life. Where Sarah stumbled, Lisa soared. Where Sarah struggled to understand commands, Lisa anticipated them. Lisa represented everything Sarah had hoped to become, but feared she never could. She would approach the rope climb with determination, only to slip back down after making it barely halfway. The wall that others vaulted over with ease became her personal mountain, one she conquered only through sheer stubborn refusal to quit, long after others had moved on to the next challenge. The laughter started during the 4th week. It wasn't loud or obvious. Military training had taught everyone to be more subtle than that. But Sarah heard it. When she failed to complete the required number of pull-ups during a fitness test, she caught the smirks and barely contained chuckles from some of her fellow recruits. When she stumbled during drill practice, causing her entire row to fall out of sync, the amusement was harder to hide. "She's trying so hard," she overheard Lisa saying to another recruit during a rare break. "It's almost sad." The words weren't meant to be cruel, but they cut deeper than any insult could have. Pity was worse than hatred. Pity meant she was seen as helpless, hopeless, a lost cause. But Sarah didn't quit. Every morning when the wake-up call sounded at 0500, she dragged herself out of her bunk and laced up her boots. Every time she failed an exercise, she lined up to try again. Every evening when the others relaxed during the brief free time they were allowed, Sarah practiced. She did push-ups in a latrine, ran laps around the barracks when no one was watching, and stayed up past lights out studying military manuals by the dim glow of her flashlight. Her persistence didn't go entirely unnoticed. There were a few recruits who seemed to respect her determination, even if they couldn't understand it. Marcus Rodriguez, a quiet kid from Texas who struggled with homesickness but excelled at physical training, sometimes offered her tips on proper form. "Keep your core tight," he would whisper during push-up practice. "It makes all the difference." But even Marcus's kindness couldn't shield Sarah from the growing consensus among the training company. She didn't belong here. During week 6, when the recruits were allowed their first phone call home, Sarah sat alone while others shared stories of their progress with family and friends. She had no victories to report, no accomplishments to boast about. When she finally got her turn at the phone, she couldn't bring herself to tell her mother how badly things were going. "I'm learning so much, Mama," she said instead, forcing enthusiasm into her voice. "I'm getting stronger every day." It wasn't entirely a lie. She was getting stronger, just not fast enough to matter. Elena Martinez knew her daughter well enough to hear the strain in her voice. "Mija, you don't have to prove anything to anyone," she said softly. "You can always come home." But coming home felt like admitting defeat, and Sarah wasn't ready for that conversation yet. The training intensified as they moved into week 7. Combat simulations replaced basic exercises, and the pressure to perform as a cohesive unit increased dramatically. During one particularly challenging field exercise, Sarah struggled to keep pace during a night march resulted in her entire squad falling behind schedule. The repercussions were swift and collective: extra duties for everyone, shortened meal times, and additional fitness training that pushed the already exhausted recruits to their limits. That night, as Sarah lay in her bunk listening to the angry whispers of her squad mates, she seriously considered quitting for the first time. The Army allowed for voluntary withdrawal during training, and many recruits took advantage of it when they realized military life wasn't for them. It would be easy to pack her bags and slip away before morning PT, to catch a bus back to Los Angeles, and pretend this had all been a learning experience rather than a failure. But something kept her from making that choice. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the memory of her mother's calloused hands counting out quarters for the laundromat. Maybe it was the fear that giving up here would make giving up everywhere else easier. Whatever it was, Sarah rolled over and closed her eyes, preparing for another day of struggle. Week 8 brought the first major evaluation, a comprehensive test of everything they had learned so far. Physical fitness, weapons handling, tactical knowledge, and teamwork would all be assessed over a grueling 3-day period. Sarah approached the evaluation with the same grinding determination that had carried her through the previous weeks, knowing that her scores would likely place her at the bottom, but hoping to at least avoid the humiliation of complete failure. The physical fitness portion went about as expected. Sarah's push-ups were better than they had been at the beginning of training, but still well below the standards set by her peers. Her sit-ups showed improvement, but not enough to earn anything above a barely passing score. The 2-mile run was her nemesis, and despite weeks of extra practice, she finished nearly 2 minutes behind the company average. But it was during the weapons handling portion that something shifted. Sarah had always been meticulous in her approach to learning, and The careful attention to detail that made her slow in physical training serve her well when it came to understanding the mechanical aspects of a rifle. While other recruits rushed through the assembly and disassembly process, Sarah worked methodically, checking and double-checking each component. When Drill Sergeant Morrison called time, Sarah looked up to find that she had completed the task not only correctly, but in less time than several of her more physically capable peers. Morrison's expression remained neutral as he inspected her weapon, but she thought she saw the slightest nod of approval when he found no errors in her work. "Interesting," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear, before moving on to the next recruit. That small moment of recognition meant everything to Sarah. For the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, she had excelled at something, had proven that she belonged in at least one aspect of military training. The confidence boost carried her through the tactical knowledge portion of the evaluation, where her long hours of studying paid off in the form of nearly perfect scores on written tests. But the final component of the evaluation, a team-based field exercise, would prove to be her greatest challenge yet. The exercise required squads to work together to complete a series of objectives under time pressure and simulated combat conditions. Communication, leadership, and trust would all be essential for success, and Sarah found herself assigned to a squad that included Jake Thompson and Lisa Chun. As the exercise began, Sarah could feel the tension from her squad mates. They had been paired with the company's weakest link, and everyone knew it. Jake took charge immediately, his natural leadership asserting itself as he began assigning roles and responsibilities. Sarah waited for her assignment, hoping for something she could handle competently. "Martinez," Jake said after a moment of consideration, "you take rear guard. Just try to keep up and watch our backs." Rear guard was typically the position given to the least capable member of a team, far enough back to avoid slowing down the main group, but still technically part of the unit. Sarah nodded and took her position, swallowing the sting of being relegated to the role of weak link. The exercise proved to be more challenging than anyone had anticipated. The course was designed to test not just physical capabilities, but mental resilience and adaptability. Obstacles appeared without warning. Objectives changed mid-mission, and the pressure to perform as a cohesive unit intensified with each passing hour. As Sarah's squad moved through the course, she began to notice things that others missed. From her position at the rear, she had a unique perspective on their surroundings and could see patterns in the obstacles and challenges they faced. When Jake led the team into what appeared to be a tactical disadvantage, Sarah saw the problem before anyone else. "Jake," she called out quietly, not wanting to undermine his leadership, but needing to share what she had observed. "There's a better route along the ridgeline. Less exposure, better cover." Jake paused, clearly torn between his instinct to dismiss input from the squad's weakest member and his recognition that Sarah had been paying closer attention to their surroundings than anyone else. After a moment of consideration, he decided to trust her observation. The alternate route she suggested not only proved to be more tactically sound, but also allowed the squad to complete their objective ahead of schedule. For the first time since training began, Sarah felt like a valuable member of a team rather than a burden to be carried. The feeling was intoxicating, and she found herself contributing more actively to the squad's decision-making process as the exercise continued. Her suggestions weren't always accepted, but they were heard and considered, which felt like a minor miracle. As the evaluation drew to a close, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that first day at Fort Benning. She was still not the strongest or fastest recruit in her company, and she probably never would be. But she had discovered capabilities she didn't know she possessed, and had proven to herself that persistence could eventually yield progress. The real test, however, was still to come. The final weeks of training would be the most challenging yet, and Sarah knew that her newfound confidence would be put to the ultimate test. But for the first time since arriving in Georgia, she felt like she might actually have a chance of succeeding. The momentum from Sarah's small victory during the evaluation lasted exactly 3 days. On Monday of Week 9, Drill Sergeant Morrison announced that the company would be moving into advanced combat training, and any illusions Sarah had about having turned a corner were quickly shattered. The new phase of training was designed to simulate real combat conditions, with sleep deprivation, extreme physical demands, and psychological pressure that pushed every recruit to their absolute limits. The first exercise was a simulated patrol mission that began at 0300 and was scheduled to last 18 hours. Recruits were divided into teams of 8 and given minimal supplies, including limited water, basic rations, and full combat gear that weighed nearly 60 pounds. The objective was to navigate a series of checkpoints while avoiding enemy forces played by instructors and completing tactical objectives along the way. Sarah's team included Jake Thompson, Lisa Chun, and Marcus Rodriguez, along with 4 other recruits who had formed a tight-knit group since the beginning of training. As they prepared for the mission, Sarah could feel the familiar weight of expectation. Not the expectation that she would excel, but the expectation that she would fail and drag the team down with her. The first checkpoint required a 15-kilometer hike through dense Georgia pine forest. Within the first hour, Sarah was already struggling. The combination of the heavy pack, difficult terrain, and fast pace set by Jake was pushing her beyond her physical limits. Her breathing became labored, her legs felt like lead, and the distance between her and the rest of the team began to grow. "Come on, Martinez," Marcus whispered as he dropped back to check on her. "You can do this. Just focus on one step at a time." But Sarah could see the concern in his eyes. If she couldn't keep up during the approach to the first checkpoint, how would she handle the more demanding challenges that lay ahead? The question haunted her as she forced herself to maintain pace, even though every muscle in her body screamed for rest. When they finally reached the first checkpoint, Sarah was exhausted but still functional. The team had arrived within the designated time window, but just barely. Jake gathered everyone for a quick assessment of their situation and resources. Sarah noticed that several of her teammates avoided making eye contact with her, and she could practically feel their collective anxiety about what her continued struggle might mean for their mission success. The second checkpoint required the team to cross a simulated minefield using only a map and a metal detector. This was a mental challenge rather than a physical one, requiring careful attention to detail and methodical progress. Sarah volunteered to handle the metal detector, hoping to contribute something meaningful to the team's effort. As she slowly swept the device across the ground, marking safe passage for her teammates, Sarah felt a familiar sense of purpose. This was similar to the weapons handling evaluation, a task that rewarded precision and patience rather than raw physical ability. Step by step, she guided the team through the simulated minefield, catching several mines that might have been missed by a less careful approach. "Nice work, Martinez," Lisa said quietly as they reached safety on the other side. It was the first positive comment Sarah had received from her in weeks, and it meant more than Lisa probably realized. But the goodwill generated by Sarah's successful navigation of the minefield evaporated during the third checkpoint. This stage required teams to transport a wounded team member over rough terrain to an evacuation point. The wounded soldier was played by the largest member of each team, and in Sarah's case, that meant carrying Tom Bradley, a former construction worker from Michigan who weighed nearly 200 pounds. The carrying exercise was designed to be completed in relay fashion, with team members taking turns bearing the weight. When Sarah's turn came, she gamely positioned herself to take Tom's weight across her shoulders, but the result was immediate and devastating. Her legs buckled under the combined weight of Tom, her own pack, and the physical exhaustion from the day's previous challenges. She managed only a few steps before stumbling and nearly dropping Tom in a way that would have resulted in serious injury if the situation had been real. The exercise was halted while Sarah regained her footing and caught her breath, and the team had to reorganize their carrying strategy to work around her obvious limitations. The humiliation was complete when Jake quietly, but firmly removed Sarah from the carrying rotation entirely. "We can't risk it," he said, his voice carrying no malice but plenty of disappointment. "We need to get Tom to the evac point, and we need to do it safely." For the remainder of the carrying exercise, Sarah walked alongside her team as they took turns bearing Tom's weight, knowing that she was contributing nothing to their success. She had become exactly what she feared most, dead weight that the team had to work around rather than with. The mission continued for another 8 hours, with challenges that included urban combat simulation, improvised explosive device identification, and medical first aid scenarios. Sarah participated in all of them, but her earlier failure had clearly shaken her confidence and affected her performance across the board. She made mistakes in the medical scenarios that she wouldn't have made during normal training, missed obvious tactical opportunities during the combat simulation, and generally performed at a level that confirmed everyone's worst expectations about her capabilities. When the 18-hour exercise finally ended, Sarah's team had successfully completed their mission, but the cost of her participation was clear to everyone involved. They had finished in the bottom third of all teams, and several of their difficulties could be traced directly to accommodations they had been forced to make for Sarah's limitations. That night, as Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, she overheard a conversation between Lisa and another recruit that cut deeper than any direct criticism could have. "I actually feel sorry for her," Lisa was saying. "She wants it so bad, and she works harder than almost anyone else, but sometimes wanting something isn't enough. Some people just aren't meant for this life. It's not fair to the rest of us," the other recruit replied. "In real combat, her limitations could get people killed. Why are the drill sergeants letting her continue?" Sarah pulled her pillow over her head to block out the rest of the conversation, but the damage was done. She had heard her fears spoken aloud by people whose opinions mattered to her. She wasn't just struggling. She was actively dangerous to her fellow soldiers. The next morning brought a new challenge: individual combat assessments. Each recruit would be evaluated one-on-one in various combat scenarios, from hand-to-hand fighting to tactical decision-making under pressure. Drill Sergeant Morrison watched each bout with impassive eyes, making notes on his clipboard that Sarah was certain documented her failures in excruciating detail. When her final combat assessment ended with her being choked into submission by a recruit who had completed the exercise in less than 30 seconds, Sarah was certain that her military career was over. But it was during the tactical decision-making assessment that Sarah experienced her most profound failure yet. The scenario was designed to test judgment under pressure. She was presented with a simulated combat situation where she had to decide how to respond to an ambush while protecting civilian casualties and coordinating with supporting units. The scenario was complex and demanded quick thinking, but Sarah found herself paralyzed by the weight of the decision. She could see multiple possible courses of action, each with potential benefits and serious risks. As the simulation continued and pressure mounted for her to make a choice, Sarah froze completely. "Time's up, Martinez," Morrison announced after what felt like an eternity, but had probably been less than 2 minutes. "In real combat, hesitation kills. Your indecision just got your entire unit killed, along with the civilians you were supposed to protect." The harshness of his words was matched by the disappointment in his voice. This wasn't the typical drill sergeant theatrics designed to motivate and instruct. This was genuine assessment of a recruit who had failed to demonstrate the basic competencies required for military service. That evening, Sarah was called to Morrison's office for a private meeting. She knocked on the door frame and entered when invited, standing at attention and waiting for what she was certain would be her dismissal from the program. Morrison looked up from his paperwork and studied her for a long moment. "Sit down, Martinez," he said finally, his voice carrying none of its usual commanding edge. Sarah sat carefully, maintaining her posture, but feeling her heart race as she waited for the inevitable conversation about her future in the Army. "You know why you're here," Morrison began. "Your performance has been consistently below standards since day one. Your physical fitness scores put you in the bottom 5% of your company. Your combat assessments suggest serious deficiencies in basic soldier skills, and your decision-making under pressure raises questions about your fitness for any military occupational specialty. Each word felt like a physical blow, but Sarah forced herself to maintain eye contact and listen to the assessment she knew was coming. However, Morrison continued, there are a few things that complicate the picture. Your written test scores are among the highest in the company. Your attention to detail during equipment maintenance and inspection is exceptional. And there have been moments, rare moments, where you've demonstrated tactical awareness that exceeded expectations. Sarah felt a flicker of hope, but Morrison's expression warned against optimism. The question is whether those strengths are enough to offset very significant weaknesses in core soldier competencies. I'm going to be honest with you, Martinez, if this evaluation was purely about physical performance and combat readiness, you would be on a bus home tomorrow. The words hung in the air between them, and Sarah realized that Morrison was giving her an opportunity to speak. She chose her words carefully. Drill Sergeant, I know I'm not the strongest or fastest recruit in the company. I know that my physical limitations have caused problems for my team. But I also know that I've improved significantly since I arrived, and I believe I can continue to improve if given the opportunity. Morrison nodded slowly. Improvement is important, Martinez, but the question is whether you can improve enough, fast enough, to meet the standards required of a soldier. The Army isn't a rehabilitation program for people who try hard. It's a fighting force that needs to know every member can pull their weight when lives are on the line. I understand that, Drill Sergeant, and I believe I can meet those standards. I just need more time to develop the physical capabilities that others started with. Morrison looked at her for a long moment, then made a note on his clipboard. You're going to get that time, Martinez, but not much of it. The next 3 weeks will be your final opportunity to demonstrate that you belong here. If you can't meet minimum standards by graduation, you'll be recycled into a new training company for additional basic training, or you'll be discharged from the service entirely. The relief Sarah felt at not being dismissed immediately was tempered by the reality of what lay ahead. 3 weeks to overcome months of struggle and prove herself worthy of a uniform she desperately wanted to earn. One more thing, Martinez, Morrison said as she prepared to leave. The fact that you're still here after everything you've been through says something about your character. Don't let anyone tell you that persistence isn't a valuable trait in a soldier. The question is whether you have enough other traits to go with it. As Sarah left Morrison's office and returned to her barracks, she felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief at getting another chance, fear about the challenges ahead, and a grim determination to make the most of what might be her final opportunity to prove herself. The other recruits were already asleep when she returned to her bunk, but Sarah knew she wouldn't be sleeping much that night. She had 3 weeks to transform herself from the company's weakest link into a soldier worthy of graduation. The odds were against her, but for the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, she had a clear deadline and a specific goal. Tomorrow would begin the most important 3 weeks of her life. The final 3 weeks of basic training at Fort Benning were designed to be the most demanding period of the entire program. Known as Forge Phase, these weeks would test everything the recruits had learned while pushing them beyond their perceived limitations. For Sarah Martinez, it represented her last chance to prove that she belonged in the United States Army. Sarah threw herself into preparation with an intensity that bordered on obsession. While other recruits used their limited free time to write letters home, play cards, or simply rest, Sarah spent every available moment working on her weaknesses. She did push-ups in the latrine at midnight, practiced weapons drills in the narrow space between bunks, and ran laps around the barracks building whenever she could slip away unnoticed. Her squad mates began to notice her increased dedication, though their reactions were mixed. Marcus Rodriguez continued to offer encouragement and technical advice, helping her refine her running form and suggesting strategies for improving her endurance. But others seemed to view her efforts with a combination of pity and frustration, as if her struggle was somehow making their own achievement less meaningful. "She's trying so hard it's painful to watch," Sarah overheard Jake saying to another recruit during their first week of Forge Phase. "I respect the effort, but at some point you have to face reality." The comment stung, but it also motivated Sarah to push even harder. She began waking up 30 minutes before the official reveille to get extra exercise time, and she stayed up past lights out studying tactical manuals and military procedures. The physical and mental exhaustion was overwhelming, but she pressed forward with the desperate energy of someone who knew this was her last chance. The first major challenge of Forge Phase was a 72-hour field training exercise that simulated sustained combat operations. Teams of 12 recruits were given minimal supplies and tasked with completing a series of objectives while under constant observation and harassment from training instructors. Sleep would be limited to brief naps, food would be basic field rations, and the physical demands would test every recruit's limits. Sarah's team for the exercise included both familiar faces and new challenges. Jake Thompson remained the informal leader, his natural charisma and tactical competence making him the obvious choice for coordinating team activities. Lisa Chun was assigned as the team's communication specialist, a role that played to her strengths in technical skills and attention to detail. Sarah found herself designated as the team's supply coordinator, a position that seemed designed to keep her involved while minimizing the impact of her physical limitations. The exercise began at dawn on a Monday with a forced march to the training area. Each recruit carried a 60-pound pack containing everything they would need for the next 3 days, plus additional team equipment that was distributed based on individual capabilities. Sarah struggled with the weight from the first mile, but she had learned to manage her breathing and pace herself more effectively than in previous exercises. By the time they reached the base camp location, Sarah was exhausted but still functional. More importantly, she had kept pace with the team without requiring any accommodations or delays. It was a small victory, but one that felt significant given her previous struggles with similar challenges. The first objective required the team to establish a defensive perimeter and maintain security while conducting equipment maintenance and planning for subsequent missions. Sarah's role as supply coordinator proved to be more valuable than she had anticipated. Her natural attention to detail and organizational skills allowed her to efficiently distribute resources, track consumption rates, and identify potential shortages before they became critical problems. "Martinez," Jake said during a brief planning session, "what's our water situation looking like?" Sarah consulted the notes she had been maintaining throughout the day. "We're consuming about 15% faster than planned, probably due to the heat and physical demands. At current rates, we'll run short by tomorrow evening unless we can resupply or find an alternative source." Jake nodded approvingly. "Good catch. What do you recommend?" The question surprised Sarah. This was the first time Jake had asked for her tactical input, rather than simply accepting her logistical reports. She considered the options carefully before responding. "There's a stream marked on the map about 2 clicks northeast of here. It's outside our current patrol area, but if we can incorporate water resupply into one of tomorrow's objectives, we could address the shortage without compromising our mission." Jake studied the map and nodded. "That makes sense. Work with Lisa to figure out how to integrate that into our movement plan." The confidence Jake showed in her judgment was intoxicating, and Sarah found herself contributing more actively to the team's tactical discussions as the exercise progressed. Her suggestions weren't always accepted, but they were consistently heard and considered, which represented a dramatic improvement from her previous team experiences. But it was during the second day of the exercise that Sarah's new confidence was put to its most severe test. The team's objective required them to conduct a reconnaissance mission in an area known to be patrolled by opposing forces. The mission demanded stealth, coordination, and the ability to remain undetected while gathering intelligence about enemy positions and capabilities. Sarah was assigned to a 3-person reconnaissance element along with Marcus Rodriguez and another recruit named David Park. Their job was to penetrate enemy territory, locate a specific target, and return with detailed intelligence about defensive positions and patrol patterns. The mission required them to move silently through dense forest, avoid detection by roving patrols, and complete their objective within a narrow time window. The insertion phase went smoothly. Sarah's improved fitness allowed her to keep pace during the approach march, and her attention to detail proved valuable for spotting potential hazards and obstacles along their route. When they reached the reconnaissance area, Sarah felt more confident and capable than she had at any previous point in her training. The target was a simulated enemy command post located in a clearing approximately 500 meters from their insertion point. The approach required careful movement through thick underbrush and over uneven terrain while remaining undetected by the instructors playing enemy sentries. Marcus took point, David covered their rear, and Sarah was positioned in the middle where her limitations would be least likely to compromise the mission. For 40 minutes, everything went according to plan. They moved slowly but steadily through the forest, pausing frequently to listen for sounds of enemy movement and checking their position against the detailed maps they carried. Sarah found that her experience from previous reconnaissance exercises had taught her valuable lessons about patience and observation, and she was able to spot several potential detection hazards that might have been missed by less careful observation. They were within 50 meters of their objective when disaster struck. As Sarah carefully stepped over a fallen log, her foot caught on a hidden root, and she stumbled forward, catching herself on a low-hanging branch. The branch snapped with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the silent forest like a gunshot. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Whistle blasts from multiple directions indicated that their position had been compromised, and the sounds of approaching instructors made it clear that their cover was blown. Within minutes, all 3 members of the reconnaissance team were captured by enemy forces. Their mission ended in failure. During the post-mission debrief, the instructor was brutally direct in his assessment. One moment of carelessness compromised the entire operation, he announced to the assembled team. In real combat, that mistake would have resulted in the loss of valuable intelligence and potentially the death or capture of American soldiers. Sarah felt the weight of every eye on her as the instructor continued his critique. She had come so close to contributing meaningfully to a successful mission, only to have her physical clumsiness destroy everything they had worked toward. The familiar feeling of being the weak link returned in full force, amplified by the knowledge that she had let down teammates who had begun to trust her capabilities. That night, as the team huddled together in their makeshift shelter, Sarah could feel the atmosphere of disappointment and frustration. Nobody said anything directly critical, but the silence was more damning than any verbal criticism could have been. She had proven once again that despite her improvements and best intentions, she remained a liability when it mattered most. The third and final day of the exercise brought the most challenging objective yet, a simulated assault on a fortified position that required coordination between multiple elements and precise execution under extreme time pressure. Sarah's team was assigned to provide covering fire while another element attempted to breach the enemy defenses, a role that demanded both marksmanship skills and the ability to maintain composure under simulated combat stress. Sarah had always been a competent marksman during static range exercises, but shooting accurately while under pressure and in uncomfortable positions proved to be far more challenging. As simulated enemy forces returned fire and smoke filled the air around their position, Sarah found herself struggling to maintain sight picture and control her breathing the way she had been taught. Her first few shots missed their targets entirely, and she could feel the frustration of her teammates as they compensated for her ineffective fire. Marcus, positioned next to her, tried to offer quick coaching between his own shots, but the noise and chaos of the simulated battle made communication difficult. "Breathe," he shouted over the sound of blank ammunition and artillery simulators. "Take your time and squeeze smoothly." Sarah tried to follow his advice, but The pressure of the situation and her awareness of her previous failures made it difficult to focus. Each missed shot seemed to confirm the opinion she had overheard from other recruits, that she simply wasn't cut out for military service, and that her continued presence was a liability to everyone around her. By the time the exercise ended, Sarah's shooting performance had improved somewhat, but not enough to offset the damage from her earlier failures. When the instructors conducted their after-action review, her poor marksmanship was identified as one of several factors that had prevented the mission from achieving complete success. Effective covering fire is essential for the success of any assault operation, the instructor explained to the assembled recruits. When any member of a fire team fails to suppress enemy positions effectively, it puts the entire assault element at increased risk. Once again, Sarah found herself identified as the weak link that had compromised her team's performance. The pattern was becoming depressingly familiar. Moments of competence and contribution followed by critical failures that undermined any progress she had made. As the 72-hour exercise concluded and the exhausted recruits prepared for the march back to garrison, Sarah felt emotionally and physically drained. She had pushed herself harder than ever before and had shown real improvement in several areas. But when the stakes were highest, her limitations had once again proven decisive. The march back to Fort Benning gave Sarah time to reflect on her future. With less than 2 weeks remaining in basic training, the window for proving herself was rapidly closing. Despite Morrison's promise that she would have 3 weeks to demonstrate her worthiness, Sarah was beginning to wonder if the improvement she had made would ever be enough to overcome the fundamental limitations that seemed to define her military experience. During a brief rest halt about halfway through the return march, Jake Thompson approached Sarah with an expression that was difficult to read. She braced herself for another conversation about her shortcomings, but instead found herself surprised by his opening words. "You know," he said quietly, settling down next to her on a fallen log, "you've gotten a lot better since we started training. I know the exercise didn't go perfectly, but your supply coordination kept us from running into serious problems, and your recon work was solid until that final incident." Sarah looked at him with surprise. This was the first time Jake had offered her direct encouragement, and she wasn't sure how to respond. "Thanks," she said finally, "though I'm not sure Morrison sees it the same way. I feel like every time I start to make progress, I do something that proves I don't belong here." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "I used to think that too," he admitted. "But I've been watching you, and you do something that most people don't do. You learn from every mistake, and you never quit trying. That matters more than I thought it did when we started." The conversation was brief, interrupted by the order to resume the march, but it left Sarah with something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. Maybe her struggles weren't seen by everyone as evidence of fundamental unfitness for military service. Maybe persistence and improvement counted for something, even when accompanied by failures. But as they approached Fort Benning and Sarah saw the familiar buildings where she had struggled for so many weeks, she knew that hope alone wouldn't be enough. The final 2 weeks of training would include the culminating field exercise and graduation assessments, and there would be no room for the kind of mistakes that had marked her previous performance. She had come too far to quit now, but she also knew that her next chance might be her last chance. Everything she had worked for, everything she hoped to achieve, would be determined in the days ahead. The final 2 weeks of basic training arrived with an atmosphere of anticipation and nervous energy that permeated every aspect of life at Fort Benning. For most recruits, these weeks represented the culmination of months of hard work and the final steps toward earning their place in the United States Army. For Sarah Martinez, they represented her last opportunity to prove that she belonged among those who would graduate with her training company. The week began with individual assessment conferences, where each recruit met privately with their drill sergeants to discuss their progress and receive guidance for the final evaluation period. When Sarah's name was called for her conference with Drill Sergeant Morrison, she felt the familiar mixture of anxiety and determination that had become her constant companion throughout training. Morrison's office was sparse and functional, decorated only with military certificates and a few personal photographs that hinted at a family life beyond the demands of training recruits. He gestured for Sarah to sit and spent several moments reviewing her file before speaking. "Martinez," he began, his voice carrying its usual authority, but lacking the harsh edge that characterized his public interactions with struggling recruits. "Your improvement over the past 3 weeks has been noted and documented. Your physical fitness scores have improved by nearly 30%. Your leadership potential has shown development, and your technical competence in several areas exceeds company averages." Sarah felt a surge of hope at this positive assessment, but Morrison's expression warned her against premature optimism. "However," he continued, "improvement and competence aren't the same as meeting standards. The Army doesn't graduate soldiers based on effort and potential. It graduates soldiers based on demonstrated ability to meet minimum requirements under stress." Morrison opened a folder and spread several evaluation sheets across his desk. "Your current fitness scores still place you in the bottom 15% of your company. Your combat performance during the recent field exercise showed both strengths and critical weaknesses. Most concerning, you have yet to demonstrate consistent performance under pressure." Each word felt like a judgment, but Sarah forced herself to maintain eye contact and listen to the complete assessment. "The final evaluation will consist of 3 components," Morrison explained. "A comprehensive physical fitness test, a combat skills assessment, and a leadership evaluation during the culminating field exercise. You must achieve minimum standards in all 3 areas to graduate." Morrison leaned back in his chair and studied Sarah carefully. "I'm going to be direct with you, Martinez. Based on your current performance trajectory, you have approximately a 50-50 chance of meeting graduation standards. The question is whether you can perform when it matters most." "What do you think my biggest weaknesses are, Drill Sergeant?" Sarah asked, hoping that direct feedback might help her focus her remaining preparation time. Morrison considered the question for a moment. "Physical capability remains your most obvious limitation, but it's not your most dangerous one. Your biggest weakness is that you let pressure and self-doubt affect your performance when stakes are high. You perform adequately during practice, but you struggle when evaluation is involved." The assessment was painfully accurate. Sarah had noticed the same pattern in her own performance. Steady improvement during routine training followed by regression during formal assessments and high-pressure situations. "How do I fix that, Drill Sergeant?" "Confidence comes from preparation and experience," Morrison replied. "You've done the preparation. The experience part will come during the final evaluation. The question is whether you can trust your preparation when the pressure is on." As Sarah left Morrison's office, she carried with her both encouragement and sobering reality. She had made significant improvements, but those improvements might not be enough to overcome months of struggle and inconsistent performance. The final evaluation would be the ultimate test of everything she had learned and every limitation she had worked to overcome. The first component of the final evaluation was the physical fitness test, administered 3 days after Sarah's conference with Morrison. Unlike the routine fitness assessments that had been conducted throughout training, this test would be administered under formal conditions with strict standards and no opportunities for retesting. Sarah approached the test with more confidence than she had felt during any previous physical evaluation. Her months of extra training and focused preparation had yielded measurable improvements in every area, and she felt physically stronger and more capable than at any point since arriving at Fort Benning. The push-up portion of the test went better than Sarah had dared to hope. Her form was solid, her pace was steady, and when time was called, she had completed 43 repetitions, well above the minimum standard for her age group and gender. For the first time in her military career, Sarah had not just met a physical standard, but had exceeded it comfortably. The sit-up test yielded similar results. The core strength she had developed through months of extra training allowed her to maintain good form throughout the 2-minute test period, and her final count of 57 repetitions placed her in the middle range of her company's performance distribution. But it was the 2-mile run that had always been Sarah's nemesis, and despite her improvements, she knew this would be the make-or-break component of her fitness evaluation. The minimum standard for her demographic was 16 minutes and 36 seconds, a time that had seemed impossibly fast when she first arrived, but now felt achievable if everything went perfectly. As Sarah lined up with her fellow recruits at the starting line, she tried to control the nervous energy that threatened to interfere with her performance. She had run this distance hundreds of times during training, and she knew exactly what pace she needed to maintain to achieve her target time. The first mile went according to plan. Sarah settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable and focused on maintaining steady breathing and efficient form. When she passed the 1-mile mark, her time was exactly where it needed to be for her target finish, and she felt cautiously optimistic about her chances. But during the second mile, the physical and mental fatigue from months of training began to take its toll. Her pace slowed slightly, and she had to fight against the voice in her head that whispered familiar doubts about her ability to succeed when it mattered most. Other runners began to pass her, including some who had started behind her, and Sarah felt the familiar panic that had undermined so many of her previous performances. With 400 meters remaining, Sarah could see the finish line and knew that she was cutting it close. Her lungs burned, her legs felt heavy, and every step required conscious effort to maintain form and pace. But for the first time in a high-pressure situation, she managed to push through the discomfort and mental fatigue without allowing them to derail her performance. Sarah crossed the finish line with a time of 16 minutes and 28 seconds, 8 seconds under the minimum standard, and a personal best by more than 90 seconds. As she bent over to catch her breath, she felt a surge of accomplishment that was both profound and surprising. She had not just met a standard that had seemed impossible months earlier. She had beaten it under the pressure of formal evaluation. The combat skills assessment followed 2 days later and proved to be a more complex challenge than the straightforward physical fitness test. The assessment included weapons handling, tactical decision-making, and simulated combat scenarios designed to test competence under stress. Sarah's performance during the weapons handling portion was solid and consistent with her previous demonstrations of technical competence. Her rifle assembly and disassembly times were well within standards. Her marksmanship was adequate, if not exceptional, and her knowledge of weapons safety procedures was comprehensive. The tactical scenarios proved more challenging. Sarah was presented with a series of simulated combat situations and required to make quick decisions about appropriate responses. Unlike her previous struggles with decision-making under pressure, she found that the confidence generated by her successful fitness test helped her trust her training and make choices without debilitating hesitation. In one scenario, she was required to respond to a simulated ambush while protecting civilian casualties. Drawing on lessons learned from previous exercises and extensive study of tactical procedures, Sarah coordinated suppressive fire, called for medical support, and organized an orderly withdrawal that minimized casualties and maintained unit integrity. Her performance wasn't perfect, but it demonstrated competence and leadership under pressure. The evaluating instructor's feedback was cautiously positive. Adequate performance, he noted on his assessment sheet, demonstrates basic competence in essential soldier tasks with room for continued development. For Sarah, adequate felt like high praise. After months of being identified as below standard in virtually every military skill, achieving adequacy in formal evaluation represented significant progress toward her goal of graduation. But it was the final component of the evaluation, the leadership assessment during the culminating field exercise, that would ultimately determine Sarah's fate. This 5-day exercise was designed to test everything recruits had learned during their training while providing opportunities to demonstrate leadership potential and ability to perform under sustained pressure. Sarah's role during the exercise was assistant team leader for a 12-person unit tasked with conducting multiple operations over the course of the evaluation period. Unlike previous exercises where she had been assigned supporting roles designed to minimize the impact of her limitations, this position required her to actively lead other soldiers and make decisions that would affect mission success. The first mission was a reconnaissance patrol designed to gather intelligence about enemy positions in a contested area. Sarah was responsible for planning the patrol route, coordinating with supporting elements, and ensuring that her team gathered the required intelligence while avoiding detection by opposing forces. The planning phase went smoothly. Sarah's attention to detail and systematic approach to problem-solving served her well as she analyzed maps, coordinated with other units, and developed contingency plans for various scenarios. Her teammates seemed comfortable with her leadership, and several offered suggestions and support that indicated genuine confidence in her abilities. The execution of the patrol proved more challenging. Leading a team through difficult terrain while maintaining security and achieving objectives required constant attention to multiple variables and the ability to make quick adjustments when circumstances changed. Sarah found herself drawing on lessons learned from months of similar exercises, but the responsibility of leadership added a new dimension of pressure that tested her ability to remain calm and focused. 2 hours into the patrol, Sarah's team encountered an unexpected obstacle, a simulated enemy checkpoint that blocked their planned route to the objective area. Standard procedure called for finding an alternate route, but that would require significant additional time and might prevent them from completing their mission within the allotted time frame. Sarah studied the situation carefully, considering her options and their potential consequences. She could attempt to bypass the checkpoint using a longer route, try to infiltrate through the checkpoint using stealth, or call for support to eliminate the enemy position. Each option carried risks and benefits that had to be weighed against mission requirements and available resources. After consulting with her team and considering their input, Sarah decided to attempt a stealth infiltration using a small element while the main body created a diversion elsewhere. It was a risky decision that required precise coordination and timing, but it offered the best chance of completing the mission on schedule while maintaining the security of her entire team. The execution was tense, but successful. Sarah's diversion team managed to attract the attention of the simulated enemy forces while her infiltration element gathered the required intelligence and withdrew without detection. When the exercise evaluators conducted their after-action review, they noted the creativity and effectiveness of Sarah's tactical solution. Good use of available resources, the evaluating instructor commented, demonstrated initiative and tactical thinking appropriate for leadership responsibilities. The praise was measured and professional, but for Sarah, it represented validation of everything she had worked toward. For the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, she had successfully led other soldiers in a complex operation and achieved mission success through her own planning and decision-making. The remaining missions of the exercise continued to test Sarah's leadership abilities in different contexts. She led supply operations, coordinated defensive positions, and managed personnel assignments with increasing confidence and competence. While her performance wasn't flawless, she consistently demonstrated the basic leadership skills and judgment required of a soldier. On the final day of the exercise, as Sarah's company prepared for the march back to garrison and the graduation ceremony that would follow, she reflected on how much had changed since her arrival months earlier. She was still not the strongest or fastest soldier in her company, and she probably never would be. But she had proven to herself and others that determination and persistence could overcome significant obstacles. The march back to Fort Benning felt different from all the previous marches Sarah had completed during training. Her pack felt lighter, her pace was steady, and for the first time, she felt like she belonged among the soldiers around her. She had earned her place through months of struggle and gradual improvement, and That achievement felt more meaningful than any victory that had come easily. As they approached the familiar buildings of Fort Benning, Sarah could see the graduation ceremony preparations that would transform struggling recruits into United States soldiers. In less than 48 hours, she would either march across that stage as a graduate or watch from the sidelines as her former classmates moved forward without her. But for the first time since arriving in Georgia, Sarah felt genuine confidence that she would be among the graduates. She had met the standards when it mattered most, demonstrated leadership under pressure, and proven that the person who had struggled through those first difficult weeks was capable of becoming something more. Graduation day at Fort Benning dawned clear and humid, with the kind of oppressive Georgia heat that had become as familiar to Sarah Martinez as the weight of her combat boots. She stood in formation with her fellow recruits at 0500, their dress uniforms crisp and their faces reflecting a mixture of pride, relief, and anticipation that marked the end of one of the most challenging experiences of their young lives. The past 24 hours have been a whirlwind of final preparations, equipment turn-in, and administrative processing that would transform recruits into soldiers. Sarah had completed every requirement, passed every evaluation, and earned her place among those who would graduate that morning. But despite her accomplishments, she couldn't shake the lingering uncertainty that had followed her throughout training. The graduation ceremony would be attended by family members, military dignitaries, and Fort Benning leadership, including Colonel Patricia Hayes, the installation commander who presided over all basic training operations. For most recruits, the ceremony represented a celebration of achievement and the beginning of their military careers. For Sarah, it felt like the final validation of months of struggle and determination. As the formation marched toward the graduation field, Sarah caught sight of her mother sitting in the visitor section. Elena Martinez had taken 2 buses and traveled for 15 hours to be present for her daughter's graduation, her face beaming with pride despite the obvious fatigue from the journey. Next to her sat Sarah's younger brother Miguel, now 16, and wearing his best shirt for the occasion. The sight of her family in the audience added an emotional weight to the ceremony that Sarah hadn't anticipated. These were the people who had believed in her when she barely believed in herself, who had supported her decision to join the Army even when the path forward seemed uncertain. Their presence reminded her of how much this moment meant not just to her, but to everyone who had invested in her success. Drill Sergeant Morrison took his place at the front of the formation, his bearing as commanding as ever, but his expression carrying a hint of the pride that came with successfully training another group of recruits. Over the past months, Sarah had learned to read the subtle variations in Morrison's demeanor, and she could see that today was different. Today, he was not just a drill sergeant, but a mentor who was proud to present his soldiers to their families and the Army. The graduation ceremony followed the formal traditions that had marked similar events for generations of soldiers. The company marched in precise formations, executed complex drill movements with practiced precision, and stood at attention as speakers addressed the assembled crowd about service, sacrifice, and the responsibilities that came with wearing the uniform of the United States Army. Colonel Hayes delivered the keynote address, her words carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades in military service and had personally overseen the transformation of thousands of civilians into soldiers. She spoke about the challenges of military life, the importance of continuous learning and adaptation, and the special bond that existed among those who had chosen to serve their country. Each of you has demonstrated the physical courage, mental resilience, and moral character required to earn the title of soldier, Colonel Hayes told the assembled graduates. But graduation from basic training is not an ending, it is a beginning. You will face challenges in the months and years ahead that will test everything you have learned here, and you will discover capabilities within yourselves that you never knew existed. As the ceremony continued, individual awards were presented to recruits who had distinguished themselves during training. Academic achievement awards, physical fitness excellence recognition, and leadership honors were distributed to those whose performance had exceeded standard expectations. Sarah listened to each announcement, feeling genuine pride for her fellow soldiers while accepting that her own achievements, while meaningful to her personally, did not rise to the level of formal recognition. But then Colonel Hayes called for a special presentation that had not been listed in the ceremony program. "There is one additional recognition that I would like to make today," she announced, her voice carrying across the graduation field through the public address system. "This award is not based on exceptional physical performance or outstanding academic achievement. Instead, it recognizes a different kind of excellence, the excellence that comes from perseverance, determination, and the refusal to accept limitations as permanent." Sarah felt her attention sharpen as Colonel Hayes continued. "Military service demands many different qualities from those who choose to wear a uniform. Physical strength and tactical competence are important, but they're not the only measures of soldiers' worth. Sometimes the most valuable members of our force are those who demonstrate that dedication and persistence can overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles." The colonel paused and consulted a paper in her hand. "This year's award for outstanding perseverance and determination goes to Private Martinez, Sarah Elena, for demonstrating that the heart of a soldier cannot be measured by initial capability, but by the willingness to improve, to persist, and to never surrender in the pursuit of excellence." The announcement hit Sarah like a physical shock. She heard her name echoed through the loudspeakers and felt the eyes of hundreds of people turning toward her. But for a moment, she couldn't process what was happening. An award? For her? The recruit who had struggled with every physical challenge, who had been identified as the weak link in almost every team exercise, who had barely managed to meet minimum standards for graduation. Drill Sergeant Morrison appeared beside her formation position, his face showing the first genuine smile she had seen from him since arriving at Fort Benning. "You heard the colonel, Martinez," he said quietly. Front and center. Sarah stepped out of formation and began the long walk to the platform where Colonel Hayes waited with what appeared to be an official certificate and a medal that caught the morning sunlight. Each step felt surreal, as if she were walking through someone else's dream rather than experiencing her own reality. As she approached the platform, Sarah could hear the applause from the audience, but it was the reactions of her fellow soldiers that affected her most profoundly. Jake Thompson was clapping enthusiastically, his earlier doubts about her capabilities clearly replaced by genuine respect for what she had accomplished. Lisa Chun was nodding approvingly, and even recruits who had barely spoken to her during training were showing obvious appreciation for recognition that honored persistence over raw talent. When Sarah reached the platform and stood before Colonel Hayes, the full weight of the moment settled over her. This was the commander who oversaw all training at Fort Benning, a woman whose approval represented the institutional recognition of the United States Army. And she was presenting Sarah with an award that acknowledged her journey from struggling recruit to graduating soldier. "Private Martinez," Colonel Hayes said as she pinned the medal to Sarah's dress uniform, "your drill sergeants have told me about your journey through basic training. They describe a young woman who arrived with determination, but limited physical capabilities, who struggled with challenges that came easily to others, but who never stopped working to improve herself and contribute to her unit." The colonel's voice was clear enough for the entire audience to hear, but her next words were spoken just loudly enough for Sarah to understand, a moment of personal communication within the formal ceremony. "What you've accomplished here is more impressive than finishing first in physical training or earning perfect scores on every test," Colonel Hayes said quietly, her eyes meeting Sarah's directly. "You've proven that the most important qualification for military service is not what you start with, but what you're willing to become. That kind of soldier, the one who improves every day and never gives up, is exactly who we want wearing our uniform." The medal felt heavier than its actual weight as Colonel Hayes finished the presentation and stepped back to render a formal salute. Sarah returned the salute with the precision she had practiced thousands of times during training. But this time it carried emotional significance that no practice session could have prepared her for. As Sarah returned to her position in formation, she carried with her more than just a medal and certificate. She carried the validation that her journey had been worthwhile, that her struggles had been seen and valued by people whose opinions mattered, and that the person she had become through months of persistent effort was exactly who the Army needed her to be. The remainder of the graduation ceremony passed in a blur of formations, speeches, and traditional military pageantry. But when the final command was given and the new soldiers were dismissed to meet their families, Sarah found herself surrounded by fellow graduates who wanted to congratulate her on the recognition she had received. "You earned that," Jake Thompson said as he shook her hand. "I know I didn't always make things easy for you during training, but watching you improve every single day taught me something about what real strength looks like." Lisa Chun approached with a more reserved but equally genuine expression of respect. "I owe you an apology," she said simply. "I judge your capabilities based on where you started instead of recognizing your determination to get better." That award is exactly right. Even recruits who had barely interacted with Sarah during training made efforts to acknowledge her achievement, creating an impromptu, receiving line that felt more meaningful than any formal recognition ceremony could have been. But it was the reunion with her family that provided the emotional culmination of everything Sarah had experienced over the past months. Elena Martinez embraced her daughter with tears streaming down her face, her pride evident in every word she spoke. "I knew you could do it, Mija," she whispered in Spanish. "I knew you had the strength to become whatever you wanted to be. Your father, he would be so proud to see you now." Miguel, now taller than when Sarah had left home, looked at his sister with obvious admiration. "You look like a real soldier," he said with the straightforward honesty of teenager. "I mean, you always talked about wanting to serve, but now you actually look like you belong in that uniform." As the family celebration continued around her, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months earlier, she had been a young woman with more determination than capability, more dreams than practical skills, and more heart than anyone around her believed could be enough. She had endured months of physical struggle, emotional doubt, and the constant fear that her limitations would prevent her from achieving her goals. But she had also discovered something about herself that no amount of natural athletic ability or innate talent could have taught her. She had learned that persistence could overcome temporary setbacks, that improvement was always possible for those willing to work for it, and that the respect of peers and superiors could be earned through character as much as through performance. The medal she wore represented more than just recognition for completing a challenging training program. It represented validation of a philosophy that Sarah had carried with her from the streets of East Los Angeles to the training grounds of Fort Benning. That where you start matters less than where you're willing to go, and that the person who works hardest for an achievement often values it most deeply. As the graduation festivities continued around them, Drill Sergeant Morrison approached Sarah and her family with the relaxed demeanor of someone whose formal responsibilities had been completed successfully. "Mrs. Martinez," he said to Sarah's mother, "I want you to know that your daughter represents everything we hope to achieve in basic training. She arrived with raw potential and leaves as a fully capable soldier. But more than that, she's proven that determination and character are the most important qualities we can develop in our people." Elena Martinez beamed with pride as Morrison continued. "The award she received today isn't given lightly. It recognizes something special, not just improvement, but the kind of growth that makes someone a better soldier and a better person. Sarah has earned her place in the Army, and I'm confident she'll continue to excel in whatever assignment she receives." As the day drew to a close and families began their departures, Sarah found herself standing alone for a moment on the graduation field where her journey had reached this important milestone. The challenges she had faced during training were behind her, but she knew that new challenges awaited in her first assignment and throughout her military career. But For the first time since deciding to join the Army, Sarah felt genuinely confident about her ability to meet those challenges. She had proven to herself and others that limitations were not permanent conditions, but temporary obstacles that could be overcome through effort and persistence. She had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed and had earned the respect of people whose opinions mattered to her. The whispered words of Colonel Hayes continued to echo in her mind. The most important qualification for military service is not what you start with, but what you're willing to become. Those words represented more than just recognition of her specific journey. They represented a philosophy that would guide her approach to every challenge she would face as a soldier. As Sarah walked away from Fort Benning for the last time as a trainee, she carried with her the pride of achievement, the confidence of someone who had overcome significant obstacles, and the knowledge that the laughter and doubt she had endured during those difficult early weeks had been transformed into recognition and respect. She was no longer the uncertain young woman who had arrived in Georgia with more hope than capability. She was Private Sarah Elena Martinez, United States Army, and she was ready for whatever came next.